All right, welcome in everyone to another episode of the Round Table. This is a Carolus Press podcast, hosted as always by Nick and Andrew. And today we have two esteemed guests. Those are Will Spencer from the Renaissance of Men and Ryan King from the Wisdom of Kings. How are you, gentlemen?
Good. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So we thought, obviously, you two complement each other quite well. You're older voices in the sphere. You have that kind of, let's say, one of the reasons I look up to both of you is because you have, let's say, runs on the board. You're not 21-year-old guys giving advice for how to live life. You've actually done some things and have basically like what double the life experience of a lot of guys giving out advice. So
Right.
um, that's a pretty good place to start. And I admire the work both of you do. If we could start with you, Will, for those who don't know you, can you just give a little rundown of the sort of work you're doing?
Sure. So I host the Renaissance of Men podcast, which is about the 40-year process to redeem masculinity that we're all now a part of. And I've been doing that podcast now for about 3 years and just having an explosive growth month, which has been really exciting. I do 12-week mentorships for men. And I have a men's group, and I'm working on a documentary film project about the Renaissance of Men as well.
Nice. And Ryan?
Yeah, mine's not nearly that formal. I started a business when I was 26, and I basically retired when I was 35, and I'm 39 now. And about a year and a half ago, I just kind of saw what was going on in the world and decided to start writing on Instagram. And I had no idea any of this stuff existed. I'd never heard of the red pill or the manosphere or literally anything. I was just like, I'm just going to start talking about stuff and try to help. And it's taken off far more than I ever would have expected. And I've been exposed to a lot of things that I had no idea was actually even going on. I was like, this is ridiculous. And
He regrets the whole thing.
no, I legitimately feel like the dad that like went out of town and came home early and caught his kids having a house party. What were you thinking while I was gone? So like the stuff I've been exposed to that young guys are believing now and all this stuff, I'm just like, what planet are you from? Like where it's shocking to me. So
Yeah.
it's been a
Cool.
steep learning curve.
Yeah, well,
Andrew, do you want to start the
yeah, I'll go ahead. Well, I mean,
discussion?
from both of you, that leads really well into our first question for you, which is, as older gentlemen in our sphere that have a bit more life experience, how do you recommend getting started as a young man? Like, what are the correct first steps to be taking?
Want to take this one, Ryan?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first I would focus on this is one of the myths that I've seen a lot, that I completely disagree with. Um, find a woman, get married, start a family. Don't feel like you have to have it all together and you have to be financially stable before you ever start a family. That's stupid. Your peak earning years as a man are in your mid 40s for a reason, because it takes time to make money. You're not just going to wake up one day and be making $150,000. Like, and the purpose of having a wife when I was building my business is that she took care, like we talk about these gender roles and we talk about all these traditional values and all these things, but we talk about them as ideas and we lose the practicality of it, right? Like when I was building my business, I couldn't have done what I did if I didn't have a wife. She took care of everything else. She took everything else off my plate. And men think, a wife and kids are like a burden that's going to keep them from building a business or achieving financial security or whatever. It's like, number one, you have help. You have a partner. It's like having a business partner on your career that's got more vested interest in you than anybody else ever will, because her success is your success. And you have a whole different level of motivation as a man when you have a wife and kids at home. So that would be the first thing is reject that idea that you've got to have it all together. Um, Number two, I would say, is just get started. From what I've observed with a lot of young men, I get this question all the time. They look at my life and they say, "Man, how did you get there?" And I said, "Dude, one step at a time. I didn't do it all simultaneously." And I think a lot of guys think they've got to get jacked and get ripped and get married and get rich, and they've got to do it all at the same time. And it's like, that's not practical. That's not realistic. It's just like building a house. Like, you have to build a foundation. then you have to frame the house out, and there's a process that you cannot get around, you know. And so as a man, it's basically like find a woman, start a family, figure out what your skills are, what your gifts are, and start developing those into something that you can monetize. That,
Yeah.
you know, and if that means as a young man, for a lot of young men, like when I was young, I wasn't in the gym. There's a lot of stuff people say, oh, you have to do all this stuff. It's like, I have no extra hours in my day. I'm 14 hours with my business, with this and this and this. It's like, do I need to go to the gym? Sure. The house eventually needs a roof, but I can't put it on until these other steps are done. Right. And so for me, that's the advice I get. I would say for young men is you've got to sort out, there's a whole lot of things you need to do as a man, but they've got to be, you can't do them all at once. You've got to put them in sequence. You've got to prioritize them, and you just start, and it's just like any skill. It's like you go to the gym for the first time, you're not going to be that good at it yet. Just keep going. You know, if you expect results after a week, I think a lot of young dudes basically with their lives, they do what people do at the gym, where it's like they work out once and then go weigh themselves and like, oh, I'm not getting results. It's like, dude, it does not work that way. And so I think a lot of the stuff that is told to young guys in the space is, while technically accurate, it's not put into any kind of context. And so a lot of guys feel discouraged and overwhelmed. And in reality, like if you just keep going to the gym, you'll learn more as you go. You'll learn more about the right way to lift, what to eat, etc. And you look up, and if you stick with it for 2 or 3 years, you'll be unrecognizable. And I would say the same thing as a man is that you don't have to have a playbook. You don't have to do whatever. Like, just make the best decision you can. It's probably going to be at least slightly off, but adapt, tweak it, learn from it, and then act, take more action. And, you know, don't overthink it. And you'll look up. I've lived it, right? Like, you guys are asking me for my advice. I remember like it was yesterday, sitting where you guys are, thinking, how do I become a man? And now y'all are asking me. I'm like, wow, maybe I figured it out, and I couldn't even tell you when. There wasn't some epiphany moment where I was like, oh, I figured it all out. It's like you guys are the ones validating that I figured it out. You know, so you don't even really
It,
notice it's
yeah.
happening. You do it right.
Interesting. You're kind of saying a bit like, just do the thing. Like you can make this super elaborate plan, but it's probably not gonna work out. There'll be unforeseen hurdles and things, and the best thing you can do is just straight up just do the thing, you know, and learn on the go, right?
And the most important skill you can learn as a man is problem solving. You know, a lot of people spend a lot of time on the front end trying to prevent mistakes and think through everything or whatever, when in reality, no matter how much you think about it, problems are going to happen, right? Same thing holds true if in a relationship or a marriage. It's like you try to find the perfect woman instead of, no, learn to have a good relationship skills, and you can make it work with a lot of women, right? And so what I'm seeing a lot on the internet space is a lot of thinking too much on the front end about things that no matter what you do, you're going to get in fights and disagreements with your spouse. It doesn't matter how perfect, how much, how many check boxes how many red flags or green flags, whatever. Y'all are going to have months at a time where you can't stand to be in the same room with each other. It's just part of it. You got to learn problem solving skills instead of planning
Cool.
skills.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing. Will, how would you answer that same question? Where does one begin as a man?
Mm-hmm. So one of the ways that Ryan and I work well together is we come up the same problem from different directions. Ryan has a very grounded bottom up kind of approach, like meat and potatoes, nuts and bolts. And that's one of the things that I really love about what he does, because he does it so well. And I think a lot of people love that about what he does. And I take a very top down approach to thinking about things, and you kind of need both. So I think a lot of men who will be listening to this and be thinking about, where do I start, understand that you're even asking the question is a sign of something so much bigger than you. We're living in an age of just an incredible amount of father hunger, right? Like young men 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when they said, where do I start? They weren't asking each other. They were asking their dad, right? And so now we're at the point where we're past father hunger and we're to father famine, right? It is that bad. And we can talk about this later. There's also an epidemic of overmothering. So we're overmothered and underfathered. And that's kind of where we are right now. But that's the overmothered part is a longer conversation. So understand that you're the inheritors of a situation that has taken about 150 years to evolve, right? And so what are we going to do about this? Like, what are we as men going to do about this? The first thing to recognize is that the father hunger is real, and to not stop with just the advice of older brothers. So all of us as elder voices, as me and Ryan may be, we still kind of count as older brothers. We are not elders. I am not an elder. I think to be an elder, you probably technically have to be a grandfather at least. But I think that there's a component of elderhood that has really matured in wisdom. He's past the age where he's building something, and now he just wants to pass on the wisdom accumulated from a life well lived. That's an elder. So as we're thinking about solving this problem, yes, absolutely start where you are. Yes, get in the gym. Yes, don't be afraid of getting married and working it out as you go if you can find a good woman. But also find your way into a community of men, if you can, with actual elders. Now, I know there's a real thing going on with boomers, who have not necessarily been good stewards of the prosperity that they inherited, and that is a real thing. However, it's really important for us as men to seek out those who are wiser than us. And there's something to the older man archetype, to really being like, help guide me, help point all this energy that I have as a young man, help me point it in a righteous direction. Because if it's just about work and if it's just about family, those things are absolutely good. However, what is it serving? Is it serving your own appetites, or is it serving God? Is it serving something higher than yourself? And so we'll talk about the masculinity sphere. You have a lot of these guys that are like, they're very much about serving themselves. And a man who only serves himself drives right off the edge of a cliff. So seek out communities of men that you can belong to. Churches are a great example, though not exclusively churches, because they can be hard to find, where you can get yourself pointed in a righteous direction with your life. Because when things get really hard, that North Star will keep you oriented, going in the right direction, and keep you from falling off. So to Ryan's wonderful points, I would add, where do you start? Find your way into communities of older men that you trust and have receipts. And when I say older, I don't just mean 40s. Try to find men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and understand that should God bless you to live that long, you will have equal wisdom to share. So if we can connect to that longer life cycle of men, and so that we can make sure those older men point us in the right direction, and we follow that path, I think that's a good place for young men to start as well, because there is a real deep divide between the generations that we as men have to fix if we want to repair this situation of father hunger that we're facing, assuming our own fathers can't do the job.
Yeah, this epidemic of fatherlessness that you're speaking of, I think the evidence of that can really be seen in this explosion of masculinity speakers and these sort of red pill guru types.
Yep.
And I'm sort of like Ryan in that I wasn't super aware of that until more recently, in the last year or two. That wasn't really on my radar. Will, I know you have a lot more experience with that, and you've been around it for a long time. So, and our next question for y'all was actually, what have your observations been of the growth and, as some might call it, the fall of the masculinity sphere over the last few years? So, Will, if you want to take that first.
Yeah. So the Renaissance of Men, what that name means, it's not about me. The Renaissance of Men is a 40-year process to redeem masculinity. And so I observe that it's gone through 5 distinct stages. The stage we're at right now is the last one, the last stage of 5. The first stage was the mythopoetic men's movement in the 80s. We can talk about that. In the 90s was the pickup era. The pickup era, where guys, were going into nightclubs and picking up girls to have one-night stands. Out of that era is where the manosphere came from. That's where it came, directly out of that. So that's all well and good if a man is in his teens, 20s, and maybe even his early 30s. But once a man starts getting into his late 30s and early 40s, he wants to settle down and have a family, right? And then you recognize that, like, well, I'm trying to find a wife, And now I'm trying to find a good woman, and all the good women have been ruined by all the guys doing pickup stuff, and I have all these negative attitudes towards women. And so how am I going to carry that into marriage? And so what we're seeing right now is these men who are trying to carry that forward into adulthood, fatherhood, and marriage. They can't let these old attitudes go. They can't disavow their past life, and they're being dragged down by the anchor of their bad decisions, and they're rejecting the final stage. The sovereignty stage was part of it. The last stage is really Christ. Here is redemption. Here is a path forward for men and women in reconciliation. And so what's happening in the masculinity space is they're not able to let their old ways go. They're not able to disavow. They're not able to say, I was wrong. They're not able to say, all these attitudes and judgments I have about women are wrong. They're not able to allow themselves to be redeemed. And you're seeing the dialogue get more and more extreme to the level of like, have a vasectomy. That's where we're at, because these guys can't let it go. And so that's why you're seeing the masculinity sphere degrade so quickly, because it has no path forward into maturity. It has no path forward into what men have always wanted, which is families, children, legacy. It's stuck in the past, and it's an excruciating process to watch.
Ryan, I know you're so Ryan, I know you said you're a bit newer to these spheres, but do you notice something similar going on, or like you kind of said earlier when you started your first response, you just kind of came home and everyone was having a party and you were just like, what is going on? So I guess you kind of already answered that in a sense. You just saw the chaos that's been ensuing recently.
We talk about the patriarchy, right? And bring back biblical patriarchy. What the red pill is like the fratriarchy. It's just teaching people how to be
so good.
It's teaching people how to be.
Nice.
I mean, that's it, and so what it is it's because so for me, a lot of the things that they talk about as like new problems, I experienced as a young guy, right? Like, yeah, women are hypergamous is one of the new things. It's like, oh, so you mean the hot cheerleader is always going to date the high school quarterback? Yeah, that's not new. You didn't invent anything, genius. Okay, and so like, yeah, duh. That's the plot of every 80s movie. That, like, what are you talking about? Of course women are going to go after the highest prize they can get. And quit getting your feelings hurt. I got broken up with for guys that were better athletes than me, or got guys that were better looking than me, or whatever. But the difference was I was still an athlete. I was still tall. I still had those things going for me. And so when I was 22, I acted the way that these guys act, like a frat boy, right? But the dorky guys didn't even get in that door. They were just stuck at home playing Dungeons and Dragons on board games or whatever, right? Well, basically all it is the red pill teaches dorky guys that didn't get the experience organically how to behave like the frat boys that they could never be. And they pretend like that's the end goal of masculinity. Like, if you can act like a frat boy, then you're a man. And it's like, no, that's kindergarten manhood. It's manhood, but it's not graduating manhood. It's preschool manhood. It is a phase of manhood that I went through, that most guys went through when they were 20. Okay, I'm not judging anybody. I wasn't perfect when I was 20, but it's a big problem if like all the guys I was in, like I went to frat parties with, they're all married and have families now. They're not 38 years old griping about how terrible women are. They've never been divorced. They're like, and so it's really just taking dorky guys that just never got access to like the natural progression of manhood amongst their peers and with women their own age, and it's teaching them how to be frat boys. It's the fratriarchy.
And to add on to that, the reason why those boys need that is they didn't have fathers, right?
Oh.
And yeah. So it's to make sure, like, at a certain point, a man becomes responsible for the ideology that he espouses. At a certain point, okay, you didn't have a father, and so I understand that you're drinking sewer water because you're thirsty. But at a certain point, you have to take responsibility for your health, to probably draw the metaphor out too far. But yeah, I mean, like, again, it's a symptomatic of the father hunger. And what I say, I love the fratriarchy, because that just puts an incredible bow on the idea that I've been saying. We've been trying to solve the problem of father hunger with a bunch of older brothers. Like, what is a fraternity but having a bunch of older brothers around you to bully you? It's for your own good, man. It's for your own good that I'm treating you like this. It's like, we actually need fathers, is what's going on.
Yeah, and the
And my
irony comes in where a lot of these guys that are being posited as these red pill or masculinity gurus that are getting into their 30s and 40s at this point really have no business speaking about masculinity at all.
Right.
But they have millions of young men that are looking to them as if they do. And so, yeah,
Well,
definitely have an issue here where,
it's a
oh, go ahead.
business. It's a business, right? Like they're preying upon the father hunger to enrich themselves.
yep.
That's it. And that's my. I don't blame. Like Will said, at a certain point, I blame the young guy, but I don't blame a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid that's never had a dad for following those guys and listening to them. What else do they have to go off of? If that's all they know to go off, if it's either that or what they read in the media about how everything is men's fault,
Yep.
well, then yeah, I get it. I don't blame them, but I have a big problem because I see because the guys like Roland Tomasi and Andrew Tate and all those guys are my peers. I know what they're doing. I see the game they're playing, and it's bullshit. And so they're the ones I have a problem with because they're preying upon the father hunger with bad advice, telling men what they want to hear, driving their supercars, and exploiting the father hunger for their own fame and enrichment. And they're not really making anybody better than a frat boy that's going to perpetuate all the problems that men, all the bad things that men have done. They're learning how to do those things now, and now they think they're even now they even think they're justified in doing it.
Yeah, and they say when you challenge them, it's like, this is just the way things are, man. I'm just being realistic, right? Like, they get really defensive when you try and challenge them from a higher moral position.
Yeah, the worst is definitely the appeal to Darwinian evolution to justify bad sexual ethics. That's my personal least favorite, I should say. But moving on, Andrew, you got the next question there.
Well, our next question actually ties into the same discussion, which because it's what qualifies a man in your eyes to speak on masculinity? What is the benchmark for that?
I think any man, and so for me, kind of talking about what Will was talking about, one of these ideas that I've had, if you could build it perfectly, is if you envision an escalator, right? You have the step that you're on with men your own age, and then you have a step above you with it's like an older brother, and then you go all the way up to there's like an 80-year-old man, right? And that escalator is constantly moving, and so as that 80-year-old man passes away, the guy on the step behind him now takes his place, right? It's this hierarchical upward moving thing. But I also think you need every man needs somebody on the same step with him. That's his brother. He needs people on multiple steps above him as older brothers and elders, but he also needs to be speaking down to the people below him, looking behind him. And that's what we don't have. I've got a lot of people that want me to mentor them, a lot, right? Because there's something in it for them. You know how many men have reached out to me to mentor me? None. Because we're never looking backwards.
Hmm.
We're looking ahead to what we can get out of it. But so I would say as young guys, if you're qualified, what makes you qualified to speak about masculinity? Well, you're 21 years old. You're perfectly qualified to speak about masculinity to a 17-year-old.
I love this guy.
Very interesting perspective there. Yeah.
That's exactly my answer too. What qualifies someone to speak up masculinity? Nothing. Nothing at all. Because if you were to say only a guy who looks like X can speak about masculinity, well, what about all the guys that look nothing like that? I always go back to the example of the Lord of the Rings. Like, how many different kind of men are in the Fellowship when they set out from Rivendell, right? 9 companions, and they're all very different from each other. Gandalf, Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, and you never look at any of these guys and say, oh, that guy's not a man. You can look at Aragorn, you can say, that dude's a man, but like Frodo's the guy who carried the ring, right? And so there's this really low resolution masculinity thing that's developed as a result of the manosphere and all of that, where it's like, this is a man. And films have played into that, and Greek statues and stuff like that, where it's like, we have this archetypal idea of what a man is, but that doesn't reflect actual reality. And again, it's a symptom of the father hunger. We don't actually know what a man looks like because our fathers didn't model it for us. So we have to go to media, and then we go to fallen media that's selling us something versus timeless works of literature. And when you read timeless works of literature, you see how complicated masculinity really is. It's incredibly complicated. So you can't narrow it down to just one image. And so what that means is that everyone has something to contribute to the dialogue. And what I love about what Ryan said is that a young man at age 21, yeah, he might have a lot to say about masculinity to the guys around him. He might have been on a 1-year journey of transformation, and he may be able to talk to the 19-year-old guys. But like, what is like an 80-year-old is going to talk about masculinity very differently than a 19-year-old. And those two men both have equally valid things to say. Maybe they have things to say to each other, but they have things to say to their peer groups. So one of the things that goes on in the manosphere is there's a lot of gatekeeping. Like, you're not a man. You don't have a right to talk about that, bro. Where's your what color's your Bugatti, right? Stuff like that. And the thing is it's actually really insulting. It's really, really insulting to say that every man should be exactly like Andrew Tate, or that every man should be exactly like, pick your favorite influencer. They're all caricatures anyway. They're not real men. They're not, like, you don't get to know who these guys really are. You don't get to see them with their families. They can posture and they can put up a good Instagram reel or TikTok reel, but I guarantee you they turn that off and they turn into family guys. And so so we have to make sure that when we're saying, what does it mean to be a man? Well, let's talk to you first. Let's have you talk to your peers, right? And let's see who these guys really are behind the scenes. And I guarantee you we'll get a much more complicated picture than what the media tells us or what the manosphere tells us.
And multiple, I mean, one thing as a dad, right? Like, my sons are 12 and 14, and as a good or a bad a father as I am, however that ends up working out,
He's a good father. He's a good father.
It means something though if they were to have like a mentor like you guys' age, and you're reinforcing similar messages that I've already said about how to conduct yourself as a man and what's honorable or whatever, because they're going to see you differently than they see me. And so I think every guy should be looking for younger guys to mentor and pass on his knowledge, because it's going to help. It's going to, you might get through to my boys in a way that I never would be able to if you were mentoring them, because y'all are cool. I'm the old dad guy. You know what I mean? And y'all will be there someday, and you'll understand how important those in between type of older brother relationships are. That you're gonna be able to influence and impact a 17-year-old guy in a way that I can't, right? Like, you're learning from me, but it's too advanced. It's like calculus, and they're still on addition, right? And y'all are in between doing like pre-algebra, right? And so we've got to connect these things. There can't be these big, broad separations between like an 80-year-old trying to teach a 17-year-old. It's almost like there's a language barrier at that point. Like, almost.
And young men learn from mentoring those younger than them. So if you're 21, 22 years old and you have the chance to mentor a guy who's 17, you will learn more about where you were, and that's how you develop mastery, is teaching those, those behind you, right? And as you have people teaching you. And this is how we reforge the chain of masculinity that was broken 150 years ago or so.
Yeah, very interesting perspectives. It really ties us all together. There's no the men's club and the boys club. It's kind of a spectrum thing. And yeah, I really like that idea of, you're qualified to talk about masculinity to someone a little bit younger than you, and it might even be more effective. It's not the same comparison, but it does remind me a bit of that Jordan Peterson meme of like, your parents tell you to clean your room and you're like, shut up. And then Jordan Peterson tells you the exact same thing. You're like, who is this genius?
Yeah.
Similar kind of thing. And you can apply that to age. It's definitely true. Like a teenage boy looks up to a 20-year-old a lot more than he looks up to maybe a 40 or a 50-year-old. Yeah, it's a very, very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was in summer camp, I was like 11, 12, and like the college age kids, they seemed so old.
Oh, and you would have done anything they said, right?
Oh, yeah.
They were so cool, right? And so now think about that. And it's funny, but think about the responsibility you could potentially have as a 20-year-old guy that you probably might not even have a respect for, that you've got 12-year-old kids watching you thinking you're a hero. And you're walking around just doing whatever, right? And so,
yeah, that's a good point, because I don't think of younger guys looking at me that way at all, but I do remember exactly what you're talking about, being like 12, 13, and a freshman college kid seems like the wise old man, the coolest person you'd ever met. So
there's kids around you. Think about the impact you could have. There's kids around you that are 12, 13, 14 that are fatherless, right?
Yeah.
That don't have any masculine influence. And man, like think about it's weird to be the guy when you look in when you get that feedback. Like I never thought that 12-year-olds might look at me the way that I used to look like that, like. But I feel that way about you guys respecting me. I'm like, this is weird, man. Like you never get used to it. It never feels like, oh, I've arrived and I'm now like the guy that everyone should listen to. It always feels like, oh wow, these people are actually listening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I would encourage 20-year-old, 25-year-old guys, like, man, talk about something rewarding, talk about something that's going to build your character, talking about something that's going to be accountable, like mentoring, going and coaching a team with the boys club, right? A soccer team, or, volunteering with a foster home, and just going and playing soccer and just go take them for ice cream on their birthday. Like that's life-changing stuff for those kids.
Yeah.
And it's life-changing that every 20-year-old guy is perfectly capable of doing. I promise you that will make you feel selfishly. Let's just put aside the moral, self-righteous concept of it. I promise you that will feel more rewarding to you as a man than going out and driving a supercar. Guaranteed.
Interesting to think as well. Even when you're not consciously mentoring, you might actually be. You never know who's watching you and how you're holding yourself when you're walking down the street or at a shop or there might be some kid who just watches you for a second, and if he sees you do something stupid or goofy, he's gonna take something away from that. If he sees you do something maybe charitable, for example, he's going to take something away from that, and you might not even know he watched you from across the street. So that's something I'm going to have to think about. Yeah.
My wife actually planted that seed for me a few years ago. Something around the time I started getting gray in my beard. There's just some kind of something that happened, and so my wife was going to the gym with me, and I didn't even notice. I was just going to the gym, and I'm a pretty big guy, and my wife said, hey, you need to pay attention to the guy. I'm like, I don't need to pay attention to that guy. She said, he's watching your every move. Like he's waiting for you to say hi to him. He's waiting for you to acknowledge him. I was like, are you, what? Like I would have never in a million years have eaten. I'm just lifting weights. But he was about 28, right? And I noticed. And like I just started nodding to him and saying hi. And like he immediately was like, hey, blah, 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 and just started chatting me up, all this stuff. And for whatever reason, he was like really wanting validation from me, like man to man, right? And my wife planting that seed, I started looking for that more. It's like, are there other guys? I don't want to be like a snob if these guys are, wanting me to be nice to them or whatever, right? And it's been shocking how many guys are just like that I've noticed are just watching me when I'm at the gym, when I'm out somewhere, that just me nodding to them and shaking their hand and saying, "What's your name, man? Keep up the workout," or whatever. Like once you plant that seed of that awareness, you'll be amazed at how many people, at least for me, were actually watching you the whole time, and what it would mean to have some, just any kind of friendship, kindness from a man man to man that they respect.
Yeah, interesting. Let's go a little off script here because something kind of occurred to me as you're speaking. You mentioned an interesting word, validation. Now, I think the types of masculinity influences we were talking about before are looking for a specific type of validation. And I think there's a distinction between that and a more true validation. Will, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind discussing men looking for validation? Because we all need it. Everyone wants to be recognized. It's we're not like super humble, or we might be, but that can take some work. Everyone wants a bit of validation. Like I've heard that men always want to be appreciated, for example, and I can recognize that in my life. Well, what are the sources of validation that men can get? Like, where do they come from? And when does a man know if he's looking up the wrong tree for validation?
I am so glad you asked this question. Thank you, really, because you just
Sure.
gave me the chance to think through it and come up with an answer that I really feel. So there's a famous book called Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. And in that book, he says the question that lives in the heart of every man is, do I have what it takes? And I believe it's a father's job. And Ryan can speak to this, to validate for his son, that his son, to create opportunities for his son to discover for himself that he has what it takes. So the father delivers the message to the son, you have what it takes, and now I'm going to set up scenarios that give you the opportunity to show that you have what it takes. I think that's part of like why dads wrestle with little boys, like let the little boy win so that he has the feeling, he's not ever actually going to win, but you let him win to give him the feeling of like, I've got what it takes, just like a 3-year-old or whatever. And Ryan, you can speak to this in a second, but I think that there's another, and I think that's a very, very important kind of validation. And I think when men say validation, that's mostly what they're thinking, validate my capacity. But I think that there's another kind of validation that we're not talking about that I think is very important. And that is the validation that you matter. You matter. And I say that because I've mentored so many men that have never heard from anybody that they matter. They think that their problems are stupid. They don't think that they have worth. They don't think that they have any right to anything or any happiness because no one listened to them. No one paid attention to them. No one told them, hey, you matter just for existing. They have low self-worth, not because they doubt their capacity, that may also be true, but because no one told them that they matter, that they are important, that they have worth. And I think that's very important. It's a very sensitive spot because that validation comes from the mother. And so in our over-mothered, under-fathered environment, men don't get the validation that they have what it takes. And they also get so smothered by their mother, they don't think that their independent entity existence has any worth, that they're so subsumed within the character of their mother, they don't have any independent reality. So they're not only, they believe that they're incapable, or they don't believe that they're capable, and they also don't believe that they have any right to exist. And that is what I think causes so much brokenness in so many men, is those two things put together. So when you ask, where can men go for sources of validation? First is to seek out righteous and noble challenges and subject yourself to them, and ones that aren't on a screen, right? So like not video games, like go learn to lift something heavy is a really accessible one. Climb a mountain, do something physically challenging that you set for yourself to prove that you have capability. But then the other, and this is probably a more difficult one, is find someone to listen to you. Because the way that we validate self-worth for each other is through listening. That because I listen to you, I'm validating your worth and what you have to say, your inner experience. So find brothers, elders, mentors, potentially even a good therapist if you can find one, pastors who are just willing to listen to the things that you have to share. And with those two sources, I think a man can do a lot. And normally we will neglect finding people to listen to us. Oh, I don't like talking. It's like, I don't think that's true. I think everyone has things to share, and men do need to be listened to, particularly by other men who respect them. I think those two things will help a lot.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and just looking at the reality of the landscape of where we're at with this fatherlessness, father hunger, father famine, is here's the cold hard truth that the manosphere isn't addressing, is that we're in a position now where we all have to take up the mantle, all of us, of fathering and healing.
Yeah.
Whether we're fit for that role or not. There's nobody else.
No.
You guys are early 20s. There might be some 17-year-old kid that looks up to you. And frankly, you're not qualified to be his dad. You shouldn't have to be his dad, but there's nobody else. And the problem with what the manosphere is talking about is it's all self-oriented. How can I help you get rich? How can I help you get laid? How can I help you get jet? How can I help you? It's all about you, me, take. Until we all look at it as, okay, hypothetically, if we could get 100,000 men nationwide to just take up that mantle of like, you know what, I'm going to father the best I can everybody that I can father, whether I'm qualified or not. Whether, just like as a real dad, I promise you, and they hand that baby to you and they're like, all right, take him home. I promise you, I'm not qualified. Like when I handed my son to me and said, yeah, take him home, I'm like, really? There's no instruction manual? Like, I don't even know how to buckle the car seat in. Like I wasn't you're never qualified, right? And so there's never going to be this light bulb moment where all of a sudden you're like, I'm qualified to father somebody. I'm qualified to, as a 22-year-old, to step in and be this 17-year-old kid's surrogate father. No, you're not qualified, and you're probably going to screw up, whatever. But if we could get hundreds of thousands of men that were willing to take that on, whether it's not our responsibility, but somebody has to take the responsibility. It's a problem that needs to be solved, and if not us, then who?
Amen.
And so that's where we're at now, and that's one of the, if there was one thing I would say, one message I would want to get out through the work that I'm doing, it would be our fathers failed us. Mine didn't personally, but generationally, our fathers for the most part have failed us. So there's no one else. It's time to father each other, and we're going to screw it up, and we're not qualified for it, but it's better than just swinging in the dark. Like, you know, you guys might not know everything, but you know more than this. Like the 17-year-old with a single mom has nobody. You know more than the alternative, which is nobody, right? So just jump in and do the best you can.
You
And
know more than nothing. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that was very powerful there. Andrew, have you got where are we going next?
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, that's a perspective I haven't really considered before. So thank you. The next question is not in a direct line, but similar vein. Do the two of you think that there's any future in the masculinity sphere or space outside of Christianity?
No.
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 Yeah, well, you can take this. I know. I know you're ready to answer this.
In order to have a future, the masculinity space needs to be able to paint a way forward for men and women. What are women for? How are we going to relate to women? In fact, I was just I recorded a podcast with someone today. He had me on his show, and he said, how do we prevent the pendulum from swinging back the other way? Right? So you can say that feminism harnessed all of this collective energy of women's resentment towards men and turned it into a battering ram that they then used to smash Western civilization. So now men have been smashed. And so what the manosphere and the red pill is doing is harnessing all of this collective energy that men have and anger and resentment towards women and swinging it back the other way. And so that's going to set up a cycle for back and forth forever, right? And we don't want that. Now, the only way out of that cycle is to recognize that we are all sinners in need of a savior, and we all are fallen, and we all have things to apologize for and all have things to be forgiven for, and we all need to bow the knee to something higher than ourselves. And the only way out of that is Christianity. It is not Islam, because Islam ain't like that. It ain't Buddhism, it ain't Hinduism, and I can go on a long conversation about those as well. The only way out is through reconciliation in Christ, and that is the great reconciliation that I talk about. That's the only way forward for anything really relevant in the masculinity sphere. Now, look, some guys are going to keep doing it. Some guys will continue selling, fornication and pickup, and there will always be feminists to peel women off. That dynamic will continue. It's not just going to simply go away. But for men and women that are looking for a way forward to fatherhood, faith, families, and fidelity, Christ is the only way, because you have to be serving something higher than yourself. You as a man have to be accountable to something higher than yourself, and that's the only way forward. And fortunately, as you know, since we're all on Instagram, we know how many women are looking for that as well. That's been the biggest blessing about starting the Renaissance of Men and discovering just how many women want that also, and they are not welcome in the manosphere or the fratriarchy. They're not welcome there. They're objects, or they're subjects of ridicule. They're not human beings. They're not people. And so men are people, women are people. Let's forge a future together. And it just happens that Christianity paints a beautiful picture for how we can do that. So I'm hoping to lead. I know many other men are hoping to lead men and women forward out of all this.
Yeah.
Been much to add there, Ryan or Andrew?
I think it's a tricky answer for me personally, just given my upbringing. I mean, you know, my parents met at church. I played baby Jesus in the Christmas play when I was 3 weeks old. And I went to Christian school, so
Nailed his lines.
yeah, I raised my hand up right in the middle of the song. I thought I was a baby doll, and then I raised my hand up right at the yeah, I was awesome. And and I also went to Christian school, and so I had Bible class every day from the time I was in kindergarten, 5 days a week through high school. And so one of the things that I've observed, and I can't quite figure it out, is that the Christian men that I know and admire and respect and that I view as masculine, all of them came to faith as adults. They were not raised in it. The ones that I've seen that have been raised in it, something about what they're teaching in churches, I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it, but it's like it declaws them if they're raised in it. They don't take action like, oh, I got to pray about it first, you know. And there's almost something like, well, does the Bible, is this a sin? Is that, and it almost makes them very effeminate and indecisive and lost, afraid of everything. Like I can tell you as a young kid, I grew up, everybody, and still where I live in Arkansas in the United States, man. It's still the 1950s here. Everybody's a Christian.
Can confirm.
And I can tell you, as a young guy, when I was 15, none of the guys that I thought that were older and cooler that I looked up to were Christians. Christians were just dorky and goofy. They didn't act, they're like, hey, partner, it's good to see you. You know, there's no, you know, and so I I don't think necessarily, I don't think necessarily that it's as simple as if you want to be masculine, just become a Christian.
No, it's not.
It's not that simple. I think what you find happening is that men discover their masculinity first, and when you follow it to its logical conclusion, it does lead to Christ. I've seen
That's me.
seen that happen. What I don't have an answer for is what to do about like raising your kids. And it's almost like, as a parent, right? Like my generation, we were always told, like, do it because I said so. And it turns off your critical thinking, whereas your kids, you end up rebelling. Whereas for me as a dad, Will and I had this conversation the other night, I don't tell my kids what to do because I said so. I say, I'm very strict, but I explain to them why I'm strict. I talk to them like an adult, and I explain why I am the way that I am, but I explain it to them in a way that they understand, and then they can make sense of it, and they don't rebel because like, oh, that makes sense. And so it's almost like there's a version of that where it's like, oh, well, why are you doing it that way? Why do you believe in gender roles? Well, because the Bible says so. It does say so. But if you can't articulate it, and if you can't understand the why part of it, then as soon as anything that isn't specifically codified in the Bible, like what to do about, you know, if my wife is spending too much money, like I don't remember that being in the Bible, like how to handle that situation, then all of a sudden they're lost because they have no practical, like real world stuff other than like, oh, the Bible says, and still around here it's like, you know what, kids that go to youth group, you know what they get out of youth group? Don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex, don't say cuss words. It's this empty formulaic whatever, right? And so it's a challenge for me. I don't know what I think about it. I know growing up in it, there's a lot to be desired that is not being taught. And I don't think just becoming a Christian is enough. You know, I think it's a natural outcome when you follow a certain path. but I've also seen a lot of men make a lot of mistakes by being very passive, and that's part of what's going on. I mean, and men have become passive, and Christian men are some of the most passive men that I know. I mean, they don't take action. Like, oh, I've been praying about it. Well, what have you done? "Oh, I'm just waiting for God to give me direction." Like, God can't steer a parked car, bro. Like, start taking action, pray, say, "God, I'm going to go do this, and if it's not the right thing, then stop me." But do it, do something. And most Christian men that I know aren't like that. They're just goofballs. They're just goofballs. They're like the sitcom dad. That's the idiot. He's just an idiot goofball.
I think with what you were saying with a lot of the guys that have been raised Christian not being particularly masculine, and I think there was kind of the answer in that response a little bit there. You said like with women's youth groups, it's don't, right? It's not affirming anything. And so everyone with a kind of, let's say maybe to put it simply, high testosterone, a bit more kind of assertive personality goes, I'm sick of being told what not to do. I'm going to look somewhere else. And they leave the church. And then what you're left with is the more passive, submissive guys who are just going to go, oh, okay, I won't do that then. I won't do that then. And everyone else kind of leaves. And I think that's what you get when it's all a question of don'ts, not rather than do's. Don't fornicate because then you won't be able to do this later on. Don't watch porn because you won't be able to have a loving marriage because of it. It's not just there and it's the thing you just can't do. There's a reason you can't do it, right? And so I think maybe if we
But
shift the dynamic a little bit.
the manosphere is explaining that to men, not churches.
Mm-hmm. So this is
point.
There's peers like us that are explaining that to men. I listen to a lot of sermons. I don't listen to they don't explain a lot of the why behind this stuff.
well. So this is kind of the space that I'm in, is dealing with this very within the Christian community that I've now become a part of, and the way that I explain it is that Christian men get 3 doses of something that secular men only get 2 doses of. So a secular man will be under we'll say the submission of the culture and his own father, right? There'll be 2 doses of effeminacy from the culture and from fathers, as we talked about. But a Christian man will get 3 doses because there's the culture, there's his father, and then there's his pastor. So he gets 3 doses that a secular man gets 2 of. So the problem is greater within the church. But the good news is that a Christian man will get 3 doses of masculinity, whereas a secular man will only get 2. Now the problem is there's so much effeminacy within the church that's hiding under so much that it's going to put up a real fight when it gets challenged, and we're seeing that right now with what's coming out of Moscow, Idaho, with Doug Wilson and Canon Press and Christian nationalism, and really pushing back on a very grounded masculine form of Christianity that's trying to reassert male headship. And there's so much friction that's being caused around that within Christian circles all the time. And we're going to see that over the course of the next year. So, last year I kind of saw coming, as Christianity impacts the masculinity dialogue, that's going to cause a lot of friction, and that's happening. It's happening faster than I expected, but it's happening. And now as masculinity impacts the Christianity dialogue, that's going to have some grinding gears as well. And it already is. But ultimately that will win out. Not all churches. I think a lot of churches are going to be forced into a position to either fully capitulate to woke or allow real masculinity to take over. And those will be good environments for men to be in. But it's going to take some time to sort out, because Ryan and I have had this discussion many times, and we've been at disagreements over it. However, I've been thinking, as I do, a lot of about the things that he says, and I was like, okay, now I get it. I see the picture now, and I understand his experience of Christianity as being very different from mine growing up in the South with all of it. It's like, okay, now I understand the reasons for it, and he's absolutely right. Like there is a goofiness to Christian men, and that's effeminacy that's come from being led by feminized churches, proto woke churches.
But
And
what happens? I know so I'm not guessing here, okay, and I won't go into all because we've got a time limit, but it's an economic problem, okay?
Yes,
it's an economics problem because, in my opinion, Pastors were never meant to be paid to be pastors. The disciples were not paid. They had other forms of living. And
Paul made tents.
as soon as pastors' income and profession started being tied to tithing, then all of a sudden they could not speak the truth, because if they made anybody mad, they would leave the church and stop tithing. I went through 2 church separations. My private school separated and became 2 different private schools because people in leadership at the church got mad at each other. And so I've lived through it. One of the guys that works for me has worked for me for 10 years. He was in ministry for 20 years before that. I know for a fact, from talking personally to pastors, to people that have been in ministry, from living it, that these pastors have been defanged because they cannot speak the truth. Because if they speak the truth and everybody leaves their church, they now don't have a job. And that is a problem.
Yeah.
That is a real problem. And I don't see that changing.
And I think that ties it to what Will was saying about feminized churches and how you were saying you grew up in feminized churches. I do think what we're seeing, though, is that as the older generation phases out, there's less lukewarm churches and more there's churches that are either becoming entirely feminized or going the entire opposite way, like you said with Doug Wilson and Cannon Bress. Because it's not just these sort of slightly feminized or quietly feminized churches that maybe you grew up in. Now you have just blatantly, churches that, all their so-called priests, they're all women. They openly are worshiping,
Well, I think what you're seeing is
it's becoming more in your face.
we're starting to doubt all of our institutions, right? We're starting to doubt the healthcare system.
Yes. Doubt. No longer listened to again.
We're starting to doubt the education system, and we're homeschooling, right? And I think institutionally, personally, I think when people view the church, the institution of the church, for the most part, has failed in its job for a variety of reasons. And what I think the solution is, just like homeschooling, we're just like, I'll do it myself. I think the solution and my preference is home churches, where the person that's your pastor that has no financial incentive, one way or the other, if you agree or disagree, he has to be able to speak the truth. And if that means you stop coming to his home church, his personal income cannot be tied to whether or not you're mad at him. And as long as it is, then I fundamentally have a distrust of the institution of the church and whether or not they can speak the truth. And I think the answer and what you're going to see evolve, just like you're seeing homeschooling evolve, is I think what we need home churches where the pastors have a full-time job that they do, and they just come together with a group of local people, just like the New Testament was. Yep. Nobody had a theology degree. It was just people loving on each other and spending time together, being there for each other, living life together. I think that's the next evolution of the church. Just like homeschooling used to be this fringe thing, and now it's been normalized. And ideally, I think that's the future of the church as it becomes. I think it will be a reaction to a lot of things, including the woke side of it. I don't see nobody in Arkansas at church is saying pro LGBT rainbow flag stuff. So that's bizarre to me. But I think you're going to see a similar reaction with church, and I think you're going to see more independent home churches as a reaction to the distrust we're seeing in our institutions across the board.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right. Unless you have what you know to be from doctrines of faith posted on the church website, which most churches can do. So if you find a church, you can go to CREC churches, Community of Reformed Evangelical Churches. That's the Reformed tradition, which Doug Wilson and Cannon Bress are a part of. So you can go to that website and find a CREC church in your local area. If you can't find one in your local area, and if people can't, then I think a home church will probably be the direction that things go. And every church nowadays, they have statement of faith on their website, and you can almost always find sermons from the pastor on YouTube. Like all churches pretty much post or a podcast, for example, so you can listen to what's actually being taught, and you can really try before you buy in many ways. And so, if you can't find a good, faithful church, traditional church in your area, yeah, I think a home church will be where people end up going, and I'm fully in support of that, because you have to engage the word in community. Wherever two or more of you are gathered in my name, I am there amidst you. Right? We're called to do that. So I encourage men listening to begin exploring that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, think about it. Like if there's a 23, 24-year-old guy who has been to church and he doesn't like it, and him and his buddies are all kind of in the same thing. Here's an idea. Get 5 of y'all together and just open the Bible up and read it together and talk about it.
Yep.
That's church, man.
Yeah. True facts.
Yeah. Well, beyond the church question, like what you said about school, I've seen that, in America, that's becoming a big thing, is Christian schooling, and especially classical Christian education. That's been exploding in the last 15, 20 years. I mean, I grew up in a classical school. All my younger siblings are currently in a classical school. So I'm excited to see that growing.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah, it is.
Stephen Wolfe, who wrote the book "The Case for Christian Nationalism," tweeted tonight that why does classical Christian education not include a physical fitness component, which is a really good thing to see him tweeting. So,
Yeah, I think the divide's just gonna go, just gonna split more and more and more. Like I think just being lukewarm in any facet of life pretty much is just gonna stop existing in the next 10 or so years. It seems that's a very boomer thing, and as the boomers slowly die off, it creeps into Gen X, it creeps into every generation, but I think the boomers are a very lukewarm generation, and a lot's been made to cater to them. And I think that was only feasible for a generation, and it's going to be pick and choose sides again, because that's always how things were. You were either all in or you were all out for all of human history. Like you were part of this country, this kingdom, this church, whatever, or you're not. There's
Boomers are
no
a
kind of
generation.
whatever.
The boomers are a generation of people that did what they were told. Their
Yeah,
parents came home from war. And their fathers grew up as soldiers. They came home, were very authoritarian.
if they came home,
If they came home, they came up, they were very authoritarian. Like my parents are boomers, and they can't not trust the institutions.
I know it's so bad.
They're incapable of it. My mom has so many health problems that I have, that my wife has healed me from, because she learned naturopathic medicine to heal me for a lot of reasons. My mom has a lot of the same issues, and she'll come over and she'll listen to all of it, and then she'll go right back to the same doctor and have her gallbladder removed. She can't not believe the institutions. Her brain is too hardened. To this day, she doesn't like that we're schooling. We've been doing it for 10 years. My boys are light years ahead of all of their peers. Okay. It's not even a comparison on the sports teams that they're on and stuff. And to this day, my mom is just like, oh, it just scares me that you're homeschooling. She has to have the certainty of like a stamp of approval from an institution. And that's where it's not that they're lukewarm, it's that they just don't think at all for themselves. They do what they're told to do, like they were taught from in the 60s. Like, do what I said because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
Go to school, get a job at one company and work your way up, get a college degree and follow the formula. And it's like it's all formulas to them, all of it.
and it's hard to blame them because it worked for them.
Yeah.
For the most part, at least early in life. Like, you talk to someone born in the 1940s in Sydney where I live, and it's, oh, well, I graduated school. I probably didn't even need to go to university to get a job, and I paid off my mortgage in 5 years. Now it's like it's not just unrealistic to do that now, it's simply impossible.
Yeah.
But it worked for them. And if it was still possible, we'd all be trusting the institution.
I think too much change just happened too fast for that generation. Like it did work for them. The problem is my mom's still only 60. It's not like she's 90. And so it's just like everything changed so much so fast that you're going to have these lukewarm boomers around for a while still. Will and I have had this conversation. I honestly think that men and women Will and I's age, Gen Z, are the oldest possible generation that can still relate to people younger. We're the first generation where it's like, you know what? We all went to college like we were told, and it didn't work out for us.
Yeah.
You know, I think we're the first generation, we're the eldest generation that isn't brainwashed
Yeah.
by all the
And
institutions that can also still speak to these younger demographics about, like, no, you don't just need to blindly go to college if you have no idea what you want to go to college for, just because all you're going to do is get drunk and have sex every weekend and oversleep class. That's what actually happens at college when you go without a purpose. Just randomly going to college because that's what you do is really, really stupid.
can confirm. I went to a really good college too.
You know, it's like, but we're the first generation that can say that.
Yeah.
With authority and be like, no, you shouldn't go to college. It was stupid. You got $150,000 of debt to get drunk every weekend.
I think a big thing that isn't well understood that I've been thinking a lot about is in the late 1970s in the United States, we shifted from being a producer economy to being a consumer economy. So there's a speech given by Jimmy Carter, his history has not remembered him as a great president, but in the late 70s, he gave a speech called the Crisis of Confidence speech, where he actually was articulating these shifts were happening in American society, where we were losing our nerve and our ability to produce. And he saw this coming and he gave this crisis of confidence speech. And then there was the crisis in Iran and he lost. And then Ronald Reagan became president. And then what happened? Massive consumerism took over, right? We outsourced all our production to China, right? And so I think boomers were just becoming parents themselves, right on the back half, on the beginning of that. And so they saw this huge flush of all this cash, maybe the money printer turning on, all this cash flow in, and it's like, oh, everything's great. Like, go back to and watch all the 80s movies and commercials and music, and everything is happy and awesome, and that's like, you go and you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and they're ripped and everything. It's like, that was the vibe of the 80s. Why? Because everyone was so flush with cash and everything was great and was going to be great forever. And those were really formative years for the boomers that they were unable to really see that they were taken advantage of every decade slowly after that. They were made the promise of limitless growth and they bought it because they were young parents themselves. And so now they can't even see that limitless growth. They can still look around and see it, but that limitless growth is coming with a price that everyone that on this call is paying. And so there was a big betrayal in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I want to wrap this up, Andrew.
Yeah, we can do that. If y'all have a few more minutes, we would go into a Q&A time that some of the members have sent in questions. But yeah, thank you a lot for this discussion. It's been great.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I've got a few.
Cool. Let's get to it.
Yeah, I'll go through them pretty quickly. First.